to talk about. All right, Tage, let's move on here to the NFC, where I think we're just going to talk about a bunch of teams. I think let's start with the Vikings. They played, of course, on Thursday night against the Rams. Tage, I went too far with the Vikings early on. No, you know how much I love Kevin O'Connell and how close the Vikings are to me. Obviously, just a really, really tough situation when you lose Christian Darrisaw at left tackle. He is so good at that spot, and it's like, all right, well, when you lose a top end tackle, like so many things kind of fall off. But even looking at the offense as a whole, just incredible on those early drives. They struggle a little bit later on. Sam Darnold has a really, really high time to throw. He's holding on to the ball. Part of that is because, O'Connell wants to push that ball down the field. I was just trying to look at is this on Donald? Is this on O'Connell? Obviously, a little bit of both for some of those second half performances. I will say, their second half, like rushing success rate dips a whole bunch of things, like 10 percentage points or something like that they're falling off. And then really, I think we have to look at the defense, where before I was like, oh no, this is a top 5 unit. I think now it feels like, hey, maybe they end the season more in the top 10 range as opposed to the top 5 range. And we had talked about it when we were previewing the Vikings game against the Lions, where the way to kind of deal with this type of defense, where they're going to send a bunch of crazy things at you, is not just let me throw the ball quick, because that's where they have their defense set up specifically to kind of like troubleshoot in that way, where it's like, you're going to throw the flat, I have a player right there. But even when there's holes elsewhere, so you want to just try and protect it, try and throw those deep inbreakers over the middle of the field. You were able to see the Packers do it a bunch, even though they were trailing. You of course saw the Rams do it a bunch. And I mean, how many quarterbacks in this league are as good as Matthew Stafford? Not a ton, but it does feel a little bit like, well, that is how like teams had a little bit of success against them last year. This is how teams are having success against them this year. And that changes just the ceiling, I think, for the overall team.
I think that's a really good point. When you look at this Vikings team right now, obviously vibes are a little bit low. 2 straight losses. You lost Darrisaw, who was having a good season, and his loss is going to be significant for this offense. I think the equalizer when it comes to the offense is just having Justin Jefferson, and like being able to spam that button is so beneficial for the Vikings offense. And I'm sure Kevin O'Connell will just continue to lean into that to help Sam Darnold, especially later in these games where they've been really good on scripted plays. They've been really good in the first quarter, and they haven't been as good after that. Like, as long as they can kind of keep finding Jefferson and getting the time to do that, it should help their offense. But I am concerned about the defense. Like that is where I'm placing some of my worry about this Vikings team right now, where the last couple of weeks, week 6 through 8, they've actually had the lowest drop back EPA per play in the league. So they have not played well when it comes to their pass defense. Their run defense has been good in that time. So a lot of the blame is going on their pass defense right now. And what's really hurting them on defense is what you mentioned with those in-breaking routes, where teams are really generating a ton of production off of dig routes against them. And that's been a big problem, where they've seen 20 dig routes thrown against them so far this season for a 55% success rate, which is much higher than their actual success rate on defense. And then teams are also doing really well on curl routes against them. And so you think about the weakness of this Vikings defense, where the defensive line can generate a lot of pressure because of Brian Flores' system and because of the edge rushing talent that they have available to them. They have decent linebacker play, and it really comes down to the corners that just aren't able to keep up on some of these in routes and some of these curl routes. And we saw that in the Lions game, where Jameson Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown were able to have pretty big days. And we saw that in the Rams game, where Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua were also able to generate some production as well.
Yeah, I'm just thinking like, all right, well, how much do we take away from the losses, obviously, to the Lions, who we just spent this time talking about how they're probably the best team in the NFC, and then the Rams, who just had like a Matt Stafford heater, where Tish, sometimes, you're used to that. Sometimes you run into that, and you can't do anything about that. I do think there is certainly concerns at the cornerback spot, and then it is a bit structural, right? Like, you cannot stop every single thing that an offense is doing. I do think, and I would not call the Vikings predictable on defense, but if it's like, well, this specific spot of your zone coverage is the weak point kind of over and over, whether it's like, we're gonna this is obviously not how the Vikings do it, but it's like if you see a team that is rotating to cover three in like 19 different ways, but you know they're always getting into cover three, then you like know, hey, these are still going to be kind of the attack points. And as the ball, like as the snap goes longer, as routes develop further down the field, it becomes sort of up more of that man-to-man matchup, even when they're not playing man coverage. So the Vikings, I think it's a little bit of a tough situation when I look at them because going into this week, I was like, this is kind of the week for the Packers to really be able to take over that spot. And we'll move on here to talking about the Packers. And I mean, this is another injury thing where you get Jordan Love who has an injury, you get Jair Alexander having an injury, you get Josh Jacobs having an injury, you get Evan Williams having an injury. So all of that is just so frustrating because I mean, selfishly, like we're looking ahead to the schedule. It's like we got Lions Packers. Like I want both these teams healthy. Like I want to really get a good answer between how good these teams are. We have talked about this for the Packers early on. The pass rush and whatever kind of gains you've seen them make on defense, the pass rush I just have like my eyes on. Whether it's again, it's like, all right, well, Tej, how many times am I going to tell you a team could benefit from adding an edge rusher? But if you're just not able to get that level of production from your pass rush, you're not able to create pressure at a really high rate. I think it causes so many problems, particularly when now we're saying, hey, you just got more and more injuries at the secondary.
Yeah, that is a really good point. And when you've had a safety duo that has played as well as the Packers have this year with Xavier McKinney and Evan Williams, it can cover up for certain aspects of your defense for so long. But you can start to see some of the cracks in their defense just overall because of the lack of pass rush, where they rank 20th in pressure rate generated so far this season. And I know I come on here and I say this every week, but on a down to down basis, I don't know if I fully buy into this Packers defense. They've generated just so much production off of turnovers this year. Whether or not they can sustain that the rest of the season is a question that I don't have the answer to. But we usually see that stuff regress first half of the season to second half of the season, or just season to season overall. So when they rank 26th in success rate and 17th in EPA per play on plays where you remove turnovers from, like that worries me a little bit just about their defense going forward.
Yeah, you mentioned like Xavier McKinney has the opposite problem that Quinyon Mitchell for the Eagles has, where it feels like McKinney has like magnets in his gloves and the ball just constantly finds him. And then for Mitchell, like he gets his hand on the ball, but it just ends up not in interception. Like literally every single game. We're not talking about the Eagles yet. We will get there. For the Packers overall, it just feels like a team that they're going to find their way into the playoffs. They're going to be an extremely tough out that you're going to hate to have to face. So overall, like I mean, we're going to see them playing late into the season. Obviously, you hope that Jordan Love, it seemed like from the early reports there that his injury is not going to be a long-term issue, but you miss Lions week. I mean, it just breaks my heart. Like obviously I know Jordan Love doesn't want to miss any of those games, but would love to see a really full strength matchup there where Tage, maybe I just need to, get back to the reality that once training camp starts, no team is at full strength, no player is fully healthy. And we're just unfortunately going to have some of these injury games. Tage, let's move on here to the NFC West now. Well, we can hit, I think, yeah, we should hit on every other division. I think that when I look at the top end here, we might as well talk about the 49ers first. I keep thinking, like, the 49ers will be fine. But will they be fine? I don't really know. Like, if CMC comes back at full health, that releases so much stress on so many players. It also releases stress on Kyle Shanahan, where defense is like, well, we're having to double Christian McCaffrey. And that just makes your one-on-ones outside easier. It lets you attack the middle of the field in different ways. So hopefully, they head into the bye week off of maybe a tighter than it should have been win against the Cowboys, but they still have some issues where you hope that they're able to, can they continue to produce against man coverage? Does CMC coming back help in the red zone, where I think that has been an issue at different times? And for me, it's like, can you win this division where it feels like the Rams are kind of creeping up just a touch with that receiving core? What are some of your thoughts here for the 49ers?
I'm pretty much with you there, where the 49ers, it's going to be tough for them, rest of season without Brandon Ayuk there, and some of the other injuries that they've had at receiver, like Juwan Jennings not playing these past couple of games. But I still think they'll be fine overall on offense because George Kittle is the best tight end in the league right now. He is playing at such a high level. In terms of what he can offer you in the receiving game and the blocking game. You have some secondary players that have stepped up a little bit, like Isaac Garando has gone from Louisville's RB2 last season to starting running back for the 49ers in that Dallas game when Jordan Mason went down with injury, and he was very efficient when running the ball. Debo Samuel had that 80-yard touchdown that was called back from a holding penalty, but like still someone who can offer you something. And Ricky Pearsall stepped up in that game, got targeted 4 times and was able to have successful plays on all 4 of those targets. They just probably won't have the same explosiveness, without McCaffrey, without Ayuk in there, just because like when you are spreading out a defense, it's a lot easier to really hit on throws up the seam, and they really are just having a lot more horizontal routes in their offense right now. But I still think that just like down to down basis, they'll still be able to generate an efficient offense because the run game looks pretty good overall, and Purdy can still play pretty well in most games as well.
And it feels like fine for the 49ers means like winning the division as opposed to having the 1 seed. I think that'll just be interesting to monitor like down the stretch where of course they lost to the Rams early in the season. Does it happen where the Rams are able to, find a way to force a tiebreaker where they're able to win it? And I think we can talk about the Rams where I mentioned like Stafford was just so good against the Vikings. And just a kind of funny narrative week where they go from like reports about, hey, Cooper Cup, like we'll give you him for a 2 to all the way to now. No, we are competing for the division. Just how quick kind of things change in such a short amount of time. I think, Sean McVay still has it. There's not really a question there. I think the defensive line has been really good. A young defensive line where they could just grow into like a top end unit where it might not happen overnight. It's going to take a little bit, but having that like 4 guys where you feel good about that at this like stage of their career, that is really, really fun. I do think that kind of concerns going forward. Like, are you going to be able to continue to protect Matt Stafford? And I think the biggest one has to just be like, can your secondary hold up at all in some of these games going forward?
I'm very aligned with you on the Rams there, where when they have Matthew Stafford, Puka Nacua, Cooper Cup all out there, their offense can be very dangerous, even if their offensive line doesn't play well, because Stafford moves enough in the pocket to get the ball out to his receivers. Obviously, he can change his arm angles to get his a clean release to a lot of those receivers. And when their run game is also playing at a pretty high level because of what Kyron Williams provides and some of the run concepts that McVay puts out there. Like once they get Jonah Jackson back in, like this offense can be pretty good there on that side of the ball. Defensive line has played well. Like you mentioned, 4th highest pressure rate so far this season. And that's with a group that could continue to get better throughout the rest of the season. But the secondary is very worrisome. Like there'll be a lot of games where the wide receiver ones go off that they're facing. So if you're the Rams, you're just hoping that you have the offense and the pass rush to kind of negate that. And I don't know if they do right now, but it'll be interesting to see if they are able to, because the secondary will let up a lot of yards probably throughout the rest of the season.
Tej, we don't need to talk too much about the Cardinals. I will say, they're sneaking around the top 10 in a lot of offensive metrics. That's important to me, of course, as a fan of Drew Petzig. Kyler Murray, I think, made some just awesome throws in their win against the Dolphins. You get Marvin Harrison and Trey McBride, both over 100 yards, both targeted, and just, you get Marvin Harrison Jr. moving in a few different ways. So that was really fun to see. Let's move on to the NFC East, where got to talk about the Eagles. I feel like this was it could be a season defining win for the Eagles in Cincinnati against the Bengals, where it was Jalen Hurts' best game. He was throwing the ball over the middle of the field. They were using play action. They were using under center. Just all of these beautiful things that you're allowed to have in an offense. I was so glad to see from the Eagles. And their offense really now is, if you play base against us, we're going to throw it on the outside. If you're going to play light in the box, we're going to run it on you. And they can be successful at both of those levels. And then to have a game from Hurts where he's able to deal with, I can extend the play. I can just sit in the pocket and make that kind of throw over the middle to Grant Calcaterra. Like that is something that is really, really good, especially when the defense is really clicking, where Quinton Mitchell just a stud on the outside. Like that is awesome to have. I think Cincinnati was able to have success bringing Jamar Chase into the slot in different formations, but I mean, the Eagles dominated them on early downs. They finally created turnover. So a really, really encouraging win for the Eagles. And for me, it's more of, can you sustain this where, again, it feels like some of that got to have it drop back pass game maybe still leaves a touch to be desired. But when you have Hurts playing like that, it just makes life so much easier.
Yeah, that I mean that is a really good point. And when you look at the Eagles offense right now. And we talked about on this preview show before their Bengals game, like they don't throw over the middle of the field that often, and they're not particularly good at it. And they come out in this game, 5 passes over the middle of the field, 100% success rate, and they generated almost 10 points of EPA off of middle of the field passes in this game. Is a very impressive showing from Jalen Hurts when he was passing over the middle of the field. And so that is really good going forward. But the key point that I thought you touched on there was when they are in expected drop back situations, they're still leaving some meat on the bone. Like their offense just isn't set up to be in those situations often, which is why it's so important for them to need to get better in the first quarter. They ranked 32nd in offensive EPA per play in the first quarter. They had 0 points in this game against the Bengals, a game where they ended up scoring 34 total points. They again got out to a slow start. And so Kellen Moore just really needs to get in the lab, start really scheming up the scripted plays, because once they get those down, they can be a very, very efficient offense. They're just really throwing a quarter right now away before they start playing the rest of the game.
Yeah, it must be nice, right? Let me just play 3 quarters of this game at a really high level. The first quarter in this game, it was interesting because like the Bengals have the ball for like 10 minutes or 10.5 minutes. So like that, that kind of ruins that a little bit. I wanted to ask you, I know I've asked you this like a million times, but how am I supposed to look at completion percentage over expected? Because for Hurts, it's continuously really, really positive, where it feels like his expected completion percentage is usually pretty low compared to the rest of the league. So for me, that feels like, and I think you see it on film as well, where he is choosing maybe lower completion percentage situations. Like we think about, hey, that go ball or go balls in general to the outside to AJ Brown or Devontae Smith. He wants to throw the ball down the field, so he's getting himself into tighter situations. Obviously, there's such a positive like right tail to those situations where you get that just awesome Devontae Smith catch in the end zone where you're able to create an explosive play there. But is that something where like year over year it's relatively stable? Is it? I always do this where it's like who gets the credit? I know it's part of the quarterback. I know it's part on the receiver. I sometimes I feel like I lean a little bit more towards the receiver, but then I see some of these perfect throws and I'm like, well, it's quarterback too. So Tej, are you just gonna tell me, hey, Shawn, every stat is an everything stat?
That's what I was planning to tell you actually here. But really, what it is the further you get down the field, the more that completion percentage over expected becomes a receiver stat. Where when you have these passes that are 5 yards away from line of scrimmage, 10 yards away from line of scrimmage, like the quarterback has a lot of control over those passes. They're choosing who to throw to, and they have they need to put accurate balls, especially when there's a lot of bodies in those situations. But when you're throwing deeper down the field, especially some of these contested catches that these receivers are coming down with, like you think about George Pickens and what he did against the Jets last week, and different situations like that, or like then it becomes more of a receiver stat because the quarterback is just throwing a 50-50 ball, and the receiver is the one making the play on the ball. And you can see this in the data when you look at completion percentage over expected, on like different air yards to different receivers. Like the better receivers are just going to come down with the ball more often. I actually think like expected completion percentage is a pretty good proxy of quarterback decision making, where you have quarterbacks like Mahomes or Lamar, or Justin Herbert, who are going to try to process the play so quickly and try to find the guy that gives them the highest expected completion percentage. And so sometimes they're engineering easier throws for themselves, either by using their legs to extend the play or just finding the guy who's the most open when they're throwing it.
I can't wait to ask you the same exact question again next week. Tej, like I'm trying to split up. Like, okay, you have Hurts, you have Brown, you have Smith. Obviously, you have whatever's going on with the pass offense design. Sometimes, Tej, apologies. It's hard to give credit to the correct people, and I feel like if anything, that signal that all of them deserve a little bit of credit. All of them deserve a little bit of blame. Speaking of blame, all right, let's move on to the Commanders here, where we don't have to talk about the Commanders Bears game at length, but just a rough situation, I think, for Chicago, where obviously their offense thing struggled through most of the game. You get two really, really good drives. You get a fullback dive to a lineman, which I guess now we have to call it a lineman dive, that ends up in a fumble. You, of course, get that end of game situation that was annoying for a few reasons, where you are not allowing a team, but like the second to last play, it's like, okay, well, we're just going to go ahead and get like 12 yards to kind of bump this up to around the 50-yard line. to make this an actual throw that can be real. And then it seems like maybe they weren't like just fully set up on the defensive side. Of course, I know a lot of people saw just a lot of videos of some of the fun things happening in the Chicago secondary on that Hail Mary play. But for the Commanders overall, just like Jaden Daniels, so impressive. So impressive for me. Where when I talk about Caleb Williams and a lot of things that he does, I just don't want to put them rank them one or two, because I think they're both so special in so many different ways. But Jaden has just continue to produce. Where in this game, of course, they don't score a ton of points, but when it comes down to it, like I don't want to make the whole entire game just based on he makes that awesome Hail Mary throw. But throughout the game, you could see him where he's extending plays, staying in the pocket, throwing the ball down the field. That's something that I spend so much time talking about with CJ Stroud. I'm not saying Jay Daniels and CJ Stroud are the same quarterback, but to see that from Daniels early on is really, really good. I'm interested to see for the Commanders how they continue to play when teams are able to deal with their run game. I just want to, I can't wait for the Commanders Eagles game. I think that will be really fun. And then in terms of concern for this team, I think it has to be on the defensive side, where even if you get a pretty positive defensive performance, where you're able to generate a bunch of pressure against the Chicago Bears, going forward, like if there's going to be anything that holds it back, it's probably going to be that.
Yeah, I do think so. Like this Commanders offense should kind of stay in the top five the rest of the season, just because of the play from Jaden Daniels, Terry McLaurin being one of the better receivers in the league right now, and so having some of the other pieces step up around them, where Noah Brown is coming through with some crucial plays. Obviously the Hail Mary, but even stuff on top of that. Zach Ertz had a decent game yesterday. Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler are both being put out onto the field at the same time. Like the creativity from Cliff Kingsbury has been pretty impressive. And then the offense has just been pretty good as a whole. So you do look at the defense, and particularly the pass defense, as the thing that worries me about this team, where they do rank 22nd in EPA per play allowed right now. So probably exceeding expectations a little bit, but they have, like just some players in the secondary, Mikey Sandstrill, Benjamin St. Juste, like those are just liabilities that you're going to have when you enter the playoffs. Like the Lions entered the playoffs last year with Cam Sutton and Kendall Vildor as their outside starting corners. They made the NFC Championship game, so it can happen. But when you have those types of corners out there that are allowing as many yards as the Commanders' corners are, that definitely is a worry for sure.
Yeah, I know. AJ Brown has just got that week 11 game circled. Like he, for whatever reason, I mean, he's obviously like one of the best receivers in the league, so he has awesome games against everyone, but he just really, really does awesome against the Commanders. Week 11 actually is going to be super fun. The Washington Commanders in Philadelphia on Thursday night, and then Kansas City at Buffalo. I think that will just be a good